Hi everyone, my name is Greg Knox. I'm the Executive Director of Skeena Wild Conservation Trust. And I'm here to tell you a bit about what we saw last year in terms of salmon returns and fisheries, and also talk about what we can expect to see this coming season in 2020, and what we might see in terms of management, fisheries, openings and closures and management actions. For this past season, 2019, I'm going to go through by species. So we'll start with sockeye. On the Skeena, DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, was forecasting about 1.7 million sockeye to return to the Skeena, but we only ended up with about 830,000 sockeye coming back. And only about 625,000 of these made it into the Skeena to spawn. This is short of the 900,000 escapement goal we typically like to see into the Skeena to spawn, and it was the second lowest sockeye salmon return since 1970. So quite a really low return. In the NAS, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans forecast about 456,000 sockeye to return. The total return ended up being about 371,000 sockeye, and about 250,000 made it into the river to spawn. So that's on target with what they usually try to get into the river, but it was a low return overall. In terms of fisheries for last summer, there were large fisheries in southeast Alaska, which intercepted quite a few of Skeena sockeye. They took about 160,000, and they took quite a few NAS sockeye, about 45,000. So they were by far the biggest fisheries, the biggest impacts on our salmon. And that's a growing concern, especially when we see low returns of sockeye salmon coming back to northern BC. Alaskan fisheries can have a major impact. There were very few commercial fisheries for sockeye on the north coast. There were a total of 7 gillnet openings in the NAS. For sockeye salmon, they took about 20,000 sockeye, which is really low compared to historic averages. And there were no fishery openings on the Skeena for commercial sockeye fisheries. Indigenous food fisheries took about 55,000 sockeye in the Skeena and in the NAS as well. So generally overall, we saw really poor returns coast-wide for sockeye salmon. There are a few exceptions. And of note is the Fraser. They were expecting about 5 million sockeye to return to the Fraser, and only about 300,000 made it back to spawn, so it's extremely low. And they try to get at least 1.35 million into the Fraser to meet their spawning requirement. So a really, really poor year for sockeye coast-wide, and not very many fisheries. So now moving on to Chinook. We experienced low returns coast-wide for Chinook generally. The Skeena saw about 30,000 Chinook return. That's about 1/3 of the long-term average, so really low Chinook returns in recent years. In the NAS, there were about 17,000 Chinook that returned, and that's about half of the long-term average, so really low returns there as well. For fisheries that took place, in the Skeena, there were about 5,000 Chinook harvested in indigenous food fisheries. In the NAS, there was about 6,000 harvested in indigenous food fisheries. The North Coast troll fishery, that mostly takes place off of Haida Gwaii, was reduced by over 40% due to conservation concerns. For the North Coast recreational fishery for Chinook, there was a small reduction from 2 to 1 per day for 10 days in late July. And there were some restrictions in the Skeena River itself. So generally poor returns for Chinook coast-wide, and some scale back in fisheries. For coho salmon, we saw average returns to Haida Gwaii and the NAS. There were poor returns to Douglas Channel, that's Kitimat South, to the Skeena, and to the Central Coast generally. Poor survival in the ocean in 2018 and 2019. And the fisheries were generally just status quo fisheries. There were no major changes in fisheries this past season. For pink salmon, we saw very poor returns coast-wide for pinks. Lake Alice River had the lowest return on record. The Babine River, surprisingly, is actually getting higher returns in recent years. Systems near the Alaska border had larger returns, so up in the Knox watershed area. And then there were very few fisheries for pink salmon, only a few commercial fisheries, mostly at the mouth of the Knox. And so not very much going on there either. For chum salmon, we saw low returns across most of the north and central coast, especially for wild chum, with the exception of the Kootzmatine had a really good return, and some Bella Coola area streams. There weren't very many fisheries targeting chum except for down in the Bella Coola area, so there's not a lot, there weren't a lot of chum around either. For steelhead, we saw low returns to the Skeena and Nass, about half of the historic average. There were, in terms of interceptions in commercial fisheries, very few caught in Canadian fisheries. Alaska may have had a significant impact on steelhead, but we don't know because they don't actually count the numbers of steelhead that they take in those fisheries. So overall, very poor returns across the north and central coast for all species, with a few exceptions, and that's mainly due to poor freshwater and ocean conditions between 2015 and 2019, which those fish experienced as both juveniles and adults. Also, if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact us at skeenawild.org, and we'll try to answer your questions the best we can.